Hello students, welcome to the video solutions of NTSE Stage 2 English Language section. The very first 5 questions are based on reading comprehension. Let's look at the passage which tries to give us an idea on what the questions will be asked on. The passage itself is an explanation coming from an author who feels that Oriental advocates mostly assume that English is understood as something which is only learnt by non-native speakers at a superficial level. This idea he put forwards as something which is an assumption given in the passage. He tries to explain this by saying these few lines. We can clearly read that according to the author, he says, they assume it as undeniable that the question is between a profound knowledge of Indian and Arabic literature and superficial knowledge of the rudiments of English on the other. So when you look at these 3 lines, you can understand that the central argument of the passage is that for a non-native Indian speaker, English is mostly assumed as something that he would know at a superficial level, at a rudimentary level, but the author is pretty much against it. When you look at the few lines given in the passage, he says that in this very town, natives who are quite competent to discuss political or scientific questions with fluency and precision in the English language. This idea is the author's central argument. So when we look at the questions, we have to remember that in the given passage, he will pretty much go ahead with the same idea and try to explain it with few examples. He says that indeed it is unusual to find even in the literary circles of the continent any foreigner who can express for himself in English with so much facility and correctness as we find in many Indians. So again we go back to the same idea that for the author, Indians are pretty much competent in understanding English language, but Oriental advocates are pretty much against this idea. So he is putting forward an argument in support of learning fluent English even if you are a non-native Indian speaker. Let's look at question number 1. The writer feels that the advocates of Oriental learning are cautiously open to the idea of English education, aware of the tyranny of English education, irrational in their views, or aware of the politics. When we look at these 4 options and match it with the central idea, we can easily see that their views are irrational as they assume that every non-native speaker, especially Indian in the case of the passage, is pretty much rudimentary in understanding of English. So we can say that the correct answer is option number 3. Let's look at question number 2. Which of the following ideas does the writer have a problem with? Now remember, when we discussed the central idea, we talked about how the author has a problem with the assumption of Oriental advocates of learning. Reading the 4 options, we can easily find that option number 2 states that dichotomy which the author has a problem with. It says knowledge of English is pitched against that of Indian and Arabic literature. Therefore, the correct answer is option number 2. Let's look at the next question.